It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here on a tape review podcast, Logan. And boy, this was not fun to watch.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't fun to watch. I mean, and I think it's one of these things where like the tape is very illuminating. I think we talked about on the post-game pod, like how we had kind of all these big feelings and how the plan wasn't good. And then like when you watch the tape, you're like, man, they did try some things. They had a lot of quick game, a lot of 7-man pro, a lot of things that you would think would help kind of accommodate some of the stuff that the Giants were going to bring, and it should have accommodated what the Giants were going to bring. Missed a couple throws from Sam, especially in the first quarter, first half really. And then you kind of look through and you say, dang, if you're the OC, like that's got to be really, really frustrating because it's like kind of everyone's making a mistake on every single play, but kind of alternating who's doing it. And you might have 10 guys doing the right thing and then one guy does the wrong thing or whatever it is. And so, like I think some of Ron's kind of frustration in the presser kind of makes more sense after watching the tape because you're like, we had a plan. It was a good plan, and I would agree with that. Like all the things that you would kind of check the box of, minus one thing that I think we'll talk about a little bit later. You're like, that's in there, and that's what I would have done. Like if I'm the OC, like I would have done something approximating that. And I think it comes down to really just a general lack of execution, and everyone kind of took turns doing it. And I think offensively, at least, that's the really frustrating thing about this game. And then I think you look at defense, and you're like, I don't know what you thought, but it was really good. Like I have to pull clips for shows, right? I go through and I pull clips, and I finished pulling clips of about 68 snaps with probably 30 plays where I was like, this is really good defensive football. And outside of probably 2 drives, like they did a lot of good stuff. The playmakers came to play. Payne, Allen had some explosive plays. Chase had a couple sacks. Montez showed up. John Ridgway had a good game. St. Juice had a good game. And you're just like, gosh, like they played well enough definitively to win the game. So it really comes down to the offense and just general lack of execution. So
I want to do this a little bit backwards from how we usually do it. Normally we go high level thoughts and then we dive into the details. I want to circle back to high level thoughts at the end. Like I want to flush out some of the details and then come back to kind of this core question of like, was the plan good? Because I think once we dive into the details, like it actually, as opposed to being hypothetical about it and not having like that illumination for the audience, for the listeners, like let's dive into some of this detail, and then we can circle back to why you think the plan was good. I think we can talk about optimization, like, is it optimal versus good versus like whatever. But the other thing I do want to note on a high level, and this is in part in taking in the reaction to my radio show yesterday, is people need to understand, fans need to understand, we need to remind ourselves that multiple things can be true at once. Like something can be the biggest cause of a particular outcome. Like the biggest reason why they lost is player A didn't execute very well. But that doesn't mean that everyone else is off the hook, right? Yeah. You're going to have mistakes and from multiple places. You could say like, hey, this should have been something that worked, but it didn't. And maybe the coaches should have adjusted faster or gotten away from, like, all these things can happen at once. And the rush to pin every single loss on one person for simplicity is not helping anyone. Maybe it makes people feel better because then there's one scapegoat and it feels like, well, if he does it again, then it's his head on the platter and we fix all our problems. Guess what? It won't fix all your problems because other people are actually making mistakes. So what we do is we go back, we look at the tape. There's a reason that you do it. You see stuff that you just don't really see live. It's a colder analysis in terms of the emotions where you like really hone in on like, this is what happened in the game. I do think that some of that emotional stuff, and getting caught up in the moment is important to remember because it helps inform what happened. But at the end of the day, like there's a reason that they say the film doesn't lie. And that's why we do this podcast. And, when we say one thing went wrong, that's not us absolving other people of mistakes. It's just to say that particular thing went wrong on that play in this game, whatever. All right. So with that said, I think when we were talking yesterday offline, like the big thing is obviously Sam. Now the O-line is going to we're going to get to now before everyone screams, we're going to get to the O-line in a second because the O-line also had its worst game of the season. But Sam also really held this offense back yesterday, which is funny because we do a segment on the radio show called Overreaction Tuesday. And of course it's featuring Linnell. And Linnell last week said Sam is holding the offense back. And I was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that wording. Like, he is because he's a young player, but like XYZ, why I don't love that wording. And he got crushed.
Linnell did.
Yeah, of course, because people were like, how can you say that about Sam? The O-line this, the EB that. And it's like everyone just wants Sam to be perfect. But at the end of the day, like an NFL quarterback's got a quarterback. And Sam didn't quarterback very well on Sunday.
Yeah, no, he didn't quarterback very well. And I think, it's not like, to me, it's not Sam letting the offense down. I think Sam could definitely be more efficient, but I don't know. I just look at him like, the first play of the game, like it's, if you just go by drives, right? And to me, I hate like this kind of wording that Sam let the offense down because everybody had a part in letting the offense down,
right. And things compile, right? Like I think there is something to Sam getting shell shocked at some point, and which is the first time I think I've seen that from him, where you look in his eyes and you're like, that is a scared quarterback, as opposed to the composure that he played with for most of the year. So like these factors commingle, but a lot of it I think starts with an inefficiency and inaccuracy and missed reads from Howell.
Yeah, so I mean, if you just start like the first series, right? You have a sack on 2nd and 9, it gets you a 3rd and 22. Like that isn't really on Sam. Like I think Dexter Lawrence has a great rush on Nick Gates, and Nick Gates, this is probably one of his worst games of the year, and he'll probably tell you the same thing. And I love Nick Gates. He plays hard, he plays with the right intent, but like that's tough, like it's 3rd and 22 under any situation is incorrect, Then you get to the next series, and we're going to talk about this one more. We talked about this more on take 5, but you throw the stick route, right? And it's not stick. It's basically hitches on one side and stick on the other side. And you overthrow a hitch with off coverage at 10 yards. That isn't going to be a first down, but it's probably going to be a 2nd and 2. And then you run the ball, good run by Chris Rodriguez. And then you have another incompletion on a man coverage on 3rd and 6. And that one is really kind of interesting to me because I don't hate the decision to throw the ball to Jahan Dotson on that crossing route because it's like coming into your vision, but the ball's way behind, right? It's way behind the receiver. So if you're going to make that throw, put it out in front. And also in that situation, you have Terry in a one-on-one man situation, and he wins pretty demonstratively. So again, I don't know what the progression is. I don't know what the read is, but I'm kind of like, can we get the ball to Terry a little bit quicker there? Maybe potentially get him started earlier. I like the matchup.
And that's one of the big criticisms that fans has. Like, how can Terry not be involved more? And it's like, well, sometimes it's because Sam chose to go somewhere else against man coverage, and the Giants played a lot of man coverage.
100%. And then next series, right? You're in what I would call a 65 protection. So tight end stays in, back stays in, 7-man pro. Everyone's picked up. Great completion to Curtis Samuel on the what I would call lightning, so like a kind of a hitch, or it's like a deeper hitch. So great job, right? Next play, we get an empty. Awesome. Love this decision. Lets you see that it's man coverage. They check to a pressure. Who cares? Leno's a little bit in between. I would say he should probably squeeze it. There's a guy in his inside gap. Squeeze that. Leave the end for Sam. Bates is on a snag route. Ball's out. Bates is wide open. Overthrow, probably because the pressure's in Sam's face. And Bates maybe takes a tick too long on the route. And that's one of the things about this defense, I think, that Wink Martindale presents is like you can work through this stuff all week in practice. We can work that zero check. We can work the pressure looks. We can work the squeezes, but they're a little bit better at it. It's a little bit faster. So it's a little off, right? Sam misses the throw. Bates is maybe a little long. Leno's got to squeeze a little bit quicker. All those things are true on that play, but it leads to an incomplete pass that's ineffective. That's ineffective football, right? So instead of being in a manageable down and distance, right, now you're in 3rd and 4. So great. 3rd and 4 ends up being a sack, right? And that's the one where they have the mental mistake with Sadiq and Nick Gates, right? Sadiq's trying to help out on Dexter Lawrence, trying to double team the best player on the defense. Gets a little overzealous. They're running a TT inside, so Dexter Lawrence is stunting to the left. Leonard Williams is looping around Dexter Lawrence, and basically gets a free run up at the A-gap. So in that sequence, that's 10 plays. How many mental mistakes did I just describe? How many physical mistakes did I just describe? Not only by the offensive line, but by Sam in terms of missing throws and maybe missing reads. I don't know for sure. But that is that. I think there's one more drive in the first quarter. Like that's it. That's the first quarter right there. That is the first quarter. Those 10 plays are the first quarter, or maybe 12 plays. And to me, that encapsulates the offensive inefficiency. So there's quick game in there. There's max protection. There's empty to identify rushers. Love all of those things. We don't execute. And
Right.
and it's not one person's fault, but in terms of things that we had talked about in the week, we had talked about, let's leave guys in protection. Let's find a quick game. Let's get an empty. Let him find his best matchup. Let's do those things. And we don't hit it. And the sack on 3rd and 6 comes off a 4-man rush. Like, it's not even like they're bringing crazy Wink Martindale pressure. Like,
that's one of the things that blew my mind about watching this film is you go back and you're like, they got a sack with a 6-man pressure against 7-man protection, or a 4-man pressure against a 5-man. Like, they were often -1 on rushers versus protectors and getting sacks or pressure.
Yeah.
Like, that's
obviously not always, but
not always, but like multiple times in the game. Like,
Right.
I think half the sacks are like that. At least. So it's the kind of thing where you then talk about, okay, well, why is that happening? Some of that does wind up reflecting on Sam as the guy who's calling and identifying the protections. And there's like one where he should have slid the line. Like, it's pretty obvious, the Pinnock sack when 27 comes off the edge. And it's like, that's not a man-to-man defender over there. There's no man for him to defend.
No
like
man.
That dude's blitzing.
Right.
How does he wind up not getting identified as a potential blitzer? And like, yes, Sam has no time to get that throw off. There's nothing he could have done post-snap, but there's something he could have done pre-snap. I do think also, and again, I know how this is going to come off. I already can hear the comments of like people saying, oh, you just want to put it on Sam. Like, when Gates loses quickly, that's on Nick Gates.
Right.
But could Sam manipulate the pocket a little bit? Like, there is a little bit of room to slide. Yeah. And so like, there's things like that where we've talked about prior to this game, prior to when we knew this was going to be an issue. One of the areas where Sam needs to grow dramatically if he's going to have a long, successful career is his ability to move within the pocket. That, when pressure comes and you just turtle up, like, it's better than a turnover. But can you find ways to move within the pocket? Because sometimes there is space. And so, quick losses, it's really hard. You just go, oh God, I'm dead. But there are times where you wonder if we're going to say, can this guy become an elite quarterback? An elite quarterback evades the sack and is able to move within the pocket. So like, again, layers, levels, nuance, all of this kind of stuff. Ultimately, like, whose fault is it? Yeah, it's Nick Gates' fault for losing immediately to Dexter Lawrence.
Right.
And that happens because he's Dexter Lawrence. But also some of these sacks come on 2nd and 3rd and long, where if Sam makes the easy throw to Curtis on 1st down, you're not in that situation in the first place.
Yeah, and it is like it's a combination of errors. Like, I just was looking ahead to my drive recap, and the next drive, like, they're trying to run a sprint to the left, right? Trying to run a sprint to the left, and Logan Thomas blocks the wrong guy. He blocks the guy that has him in man coverage as opposed to the rusher. Like, I'm a tight end. I've been in that situation before. I've probably made that same mistake, right? So it happens, but like, that's something like, if you block the right guy, you're to the perimeter. Sam has more time to kind of stress the throw, and instead of throwing an incompletion to Terry, which might have been a PI, you can kind of let that marinate a little bit more and hit Jahan Dotson, who is wide open on the corner, right? Okay, and then you just mentioned the sack where you miss ID. Like, this is tough to me. That's a tough miss ID, and it doesn't happen all the time. But again, this is the 15th play of the game, and we've had like 8 mental mistakes or physical mistakes. It's just not good football. So we've got it looks like they're going to bring an all-out pressure. They're leaving a tight end in to the offensive left, backs into the offensive left, okay? That it is very clear, based on the allocation of offensive players, that number 27 is going to come free on this. Like, he's the guy. So why is the slide not going to the offensive right? They slide to the offensive left. They book that guy. They book 27. When in my mind, you have a back and a tight end, the back can account for the linebacker. We need to slide to that guy, leave the tight end alone on the defensive end, and everyone's accounted for. And so I don't know we don't know the rules there. Like, we don't know what kind of protection call they're in, because I think that's something fans need to understand is there are probably 10 to 15 protection calls, and they all have different rules versus different looks. But I'm just saying, if that's Matt Ryan, he's going up there and saying, hey man, we're going full slide right, tight end, be a man here, block this guy for 3 seconds, I'm going to get the ball out. And I don't know where Sam is in terms of that progression, but think about that. 15 plays, and of the plays I've just described, all of those are what I would characterize as losing football. Like, you can't win with that level of execution, mentally, physically, right? And it's not like the guys. I don't make it very clear. It's not like the guys are not trying. They're
Right.
trying very hard. They're just not always doing the right thing. Like the throw to Curtis is to maybe to me encapsulates this game more than anything, where he misses him high and outside on the little hitch route. It's like right read, protection's good, route's good, footwork's good, ball sails up and out. And it's like a lot of good there, but the result of the play is a negative. And it's like, and that was the first half, really. And a lot of the third quarter was just they couldn't execute at a level to compete with the Giants on a down in and down out basis. And some of it's on Sam, some of it's on the O-line, some of it's on the receivers. Like there was one where, and some of it's on the officials. Like there's one where Jahan runs a great route, runs like a comeback, and the DB, I don't know what the ref's looking at, just literally grabs him around the waist. And I'm like, that is holding at a minimum, probably defensive pass interference. So there was, and Terry had one, and the refs kind of seemed very content to let those guys play ball in the perimeter. And that's
the intentional grounding call on Sam is horrible. Like he's clearly throwing it to where Robinson is going, and then Robinson stops. That's not intentional grounding.
And usually they're pretty, like Matt Ryan said this on the broadcast. He's like, usually they're pretty liberal with that. Like Kyle used to have a thing, like if the quarterback throws the ball, even if it's out of bounds, like sprint like to the football and act like you were going to catch it, and they usually give it to you. And B-Rob's right there. And so I was a little surprised, honestly, that they gave him that they called that on him. And again, like that's, to me, the refs, like people want to complain about the refs. They're like the weather, right? And like everyone's playing in bad weather. We benefited from some aggressive, what I would call aggressive defensive back play by Benjamin St-Juste in that game. And we'll talk about Benjamin St-Juste in a minute, but he had maybe the best game I've seen him play. Like he was just on one in terms of coverage and tight coverage. But again, he's a handsy guy. They didn't call some stuff, and that was how they were calling the game. So I don't want to say that was a thing, but in terms of offensive production, that's definitely going to mitigate effectiveness, and Terry had that one that I just described on the sprint where the guy literally grabs and pulls him. Terry's off
on the left sideline, the kind of deepish one.
Yeah, he grabs and pulls him. Terry's a little off balance and the ball hits him in the chest, but I'm like, that's a hold. Like if I'm an offensive player, I'm like looking at the ref like, what the heck are we doing here? Especially if I'm Terry, I'm going to get up and be pretty demonstrative about it. But like I said, goes both ways. So there's a lot of that stuff in this game. And if I'm putting myself in the offensive coordinator's shoes, like I'm ridiculously frustrated because some of that stuff, like some of that is New York doing a good job and forcing us in errors and creating complicated looks. But some of those are unforced errors, man. That's us not owning the game plan the way we need to own it.
So that takes us to kind of that circle out, zoom out, big picture kind of thought, which gets us back to EB. And I think that there are a couple of things he could have done. Like, let's take what you said at face value, right? If they just execute, this is a good plan. It's fine. You got quick game. You've got Max Pro. Like, you've got the stuff that you would think. To me, there are kind of
even the interception. Like, I know they get a little pressure up the middle, but like that play is open. Like that's what you as a coordinator.
I actually do think that ball gets tipped.
I hope it gets tipped. I
think there's a little bit of a tip on that slows the ball down and allows it to get picked off. But still, like, it's there.
I know. And so like that's one of those things where, again, with Kyle, Sean, Jay, name your coordinator that I was with, like they'd come in on Monday and be like, look at this. And you as an offensive player, like it's there. Like, and I didn't do what I'm supposed to do. I didn't get the block on the defensive end, or I didn't get my hat in the right spot, or I didn't run the clear route correctly, and it's there. And so I think that's that offensive film was very frustrating because I think the effort was there, which is good, but the execution was not there. Like I thought this is Jahan's best game that I've seen in a couple of weeks, just from a route running standpoint. Like he was creating separation, getting open, finding grass, running hard. And then, like he has the drop on fourth down. And I'm like, what? He has, and that's the thing that's so frustrating about it. It's so frustrating. Like, it's just everyone's trying, but the execution just was lacking at key moments in the game. And that's hard as a fan of good offensive football, and that's hard as a fan of the team, and it's hard as a fan of the guys. Like, I'm rooting for these guys. I want them to do well. And it wasn't there. And I've been in games like that. I've been that guy. Like, I think back to the Dallas Cowboys game on Thanksgiving in 2012. Like, I gave up a sack. I had 2 drops on the first drive of the game, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
And then Robert bailed your butt out.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So, well, who cares?
Thanks, Archie.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like we've all been there. It's just
Yeah.
really frustrating that it seemed like it happened in this context.
So what I was going to say is that with that being the case, right, where if you're a player, you're like, damn it, like it's all there for us. We just have to pick up this blitz. We have to make that throw. We have to make that catch. If I'm EB and I'm questioning myself, like what could I have done to help the results, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a results business. It's not a process business. We spend a lot of time on process because if you have a good process, and I'm going to use the word, if you have an optimized process, you're going to get the best results. That's the nature of process. But even if you have a good plan, I think sometimes you have to look and be like, why isn't this plan working?
Right.
And that's where 100%. I think in the second half, like he makes a couple of changes, a couple of tweaks. And then there's one big thing that they're not doing that I think we both agree would have been tremendously helpful. That thing is the screen game. To never weaponize the Giants' aggressiveness against them, I think is a massive mistake because it allows it to continue to be a strength for them. You miss the opportunities for big plays, and they never question, should we keep coming? I mean, Wink Martindale had this incredible quote that Andrew Catalan mentioned on the broadcast, which is he told the CBS crew, "We're going to pressure Sam Howell as much as is legally possible." quote unquote from Wink Martindale via the CBS broadcast. And if I'm an offensive coordinator, I go, "Come on, buddy. Are we just going to dump the ball up over your head and let Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, who, by the way, was a complete non-factor in the game, not his fault. They couldn't get him the ball. There's some check down stuff where he's open and it's probably making plays in space if Sam can get it to him, but he gets sacked because there's quick losses, quick pressures, and all the things that we talked about. So like the lack of the screen game, both receiver and running back screens, tight end screens, whatever you want to run, is to me a big miss. But I think also at some point you have to say this drop back stuff, even though it should be working, is not. Let's get to these rollouts. Let's get to this stuff quicker. And obviously they go to running the football a little bit more from under center. I think that's something we should talk about as well. But like they eventually make those changes and they start being more productive. It doesn't end in points as they only wind up with 7. And that's on a short field. But like the last 2 drives are a combined 25 plays. And if those happen within the context or over the course of 4 quarters, the scoreline looks very different because some of those drives are going to get finished. You kick a couple of field goals, etc. So that's kind of where if I'm giving an evaluation of EB with the benefit of hindsight, the plan was way better than I thought it was. It was not optimal. And I think there were clear and easy ways to make it more optimal.
Sure. And the other thing I want to point out is there was a bunch of penalties in this game that kind of derailed offensive drives too.
Yes.
So that was another factor. And let's double click on this a little bit. And this is just an interesting thought experiment for me because like I'm always like, yeah, that makes sense. Run screens, and but why not? Why didn't they do it? And one of the things that comes to mind, just having dealt with different offensive personnel and kind of game planning for a quarterback at the high school level, is if you're bringing a ton of pressure with a short quarterback, screens can sometimes not be great because they can't see the throw. So that would be one thing that maybe he was concerned about potentially, is that like we want to run more screens, but if we're getting in these 6-man overload pressures and the back's getting to that side, Sam's going to have to put air on it over the top in a back that's got man coverage, and you're kind of putting the ball up for grabs. Maybe. And again, that's a possible reason why they didn't want to do that. Also, the drop back stuff, I think, especially in the first half, like there were some opportunities to get the ball down the field. Another way to get a team to stop the blitz, obviously the screen is one game, rollouts is another, but finding explosive plays. And I think that's something that was a little disappointing, is I felt like there were a couple opportunities to kind of
Well, I was going to ask because like Kime talked about that on his podcast, and that was after they talked to Terry in the locker room. It seemed like Terry thought, and thus John thought, that there were opportunities to kind of do what the Giants did with Hyatt on St.
Yeah.
Juice, where it's like 1-2 ball out downfield on the go route. Like, were those things called and not thrown, or were they not called?
Well, I look at like what was it, the third play of the game? I think we talked about it on take 5. It's like that's the one that is most obvious to me. The sixth play of the game
Yeah,
is
when he throws to Jahan a short.
yes, it throws behind Jahan. Like Terry definitively wins, and he wins quickly. And I don't know the read, so I can't be like, you know, that's wrong, Sam. But in that kind of zero look where everybody's manned up and there's a post safety in the middle of the field, it's like I just want to pick my best matchup. And maybe he felt it was Jahan, and I don't fault the decision. But I'm also like Terry's there too. Terry wins quickly. He wins
Good versus
Manuel,
optimal.
and he's matched up against the nickel. So it's like I understand if he's matched up against Banks, who had a pretty good game and is a very physical corner on the outside, but he's matched up on the nickel. So like let's that seems like the matchup I want. And maybe that's playing chess and Sam's just playing checkers right now because he's still kind of figuring stuff out. But that's one that I would kind of look at. And also I've never met a receiver in my whole career that doesn't want to throw the ball deep. Never in my entire life. So like every receiver I know is like, we got to throw the ball deep. And I understand that, but also receivers, God bless their souls, they have no conception of like what pass protection is and how hard that is to do. So I'm also like, yeah, like let's get the ball deep. Which
in fairness to Terry, just to complete his comments real quick, he's talking about like these fades, right? Where it's 1-2 and out.
And they got to it in the second half, and I'm with it. In the first half, I didn't see that, but I'm also like, there were a ton of opportunities that in the context of the offense that was called that would have hit for explosive plays that were not executed. And whether that was sacks or incomplete ball, whatever it is. So I'm also kind of like that's the thing that's really hard about this game also is yes, there's all these solutions that could have happened, but if you would have just done what you're supposed to do, you're probably much more efficient offensively in the first half. So that's the thing where I kind of get in between on that. Yes, I agree with Terry. Like you want to get him the ball more. He's one of the best players on the field. How can we make that happen? But I'm also like, if you make this block and throw this ball, like that's a 25-yard gain, and everyone, like no one even bats an eye about the offensive production in the first half. Now you go back to your comments about is that optimal, but I've never been a part of a game plan that's perfectly optimal. Like there's been 80% game plans or 85% game plans, but I actually don't feel like some of those were bad looks just in watching the film, which is the thing that I kind of go back and forth on,
it's hard because like it works on paper. Like the question though is like, does it work in reality? Like, can your guys ultimately execute that thing that works on paper? Like you draw it up against this cover. Oh, we got the look, we got this. But if your guys can't do it, then like it doesn't really matter. And
I'm with it.
It's tough. And because as a play caller, you want to give your guys these chances to say like, hey, I got this thing that on paper, gonna kill it. If you give me this one block, we got 25 yards. And then how many times in a row, like how many times does it take before you go, hey man, all right, that guy's not going to give me that block. I got to go something else.
As far as Terry, point out too, real quick, we'll get back to Terry. Just like as a play caller, right? I think they went like 3 and out like 5 times in the first half, and I think impossible. I think it can be challenging to make that adjustment to be like, oh, this is not working. It's like, oh well, like if I'm the play caller, I just do what we just did. I'm like, oh, we missed the hitch. Like we'll come back to that. We got it,
right? Or, and hey, they hit the hitch on the next drive, first and 10. Like, it's literally the next drive on the other side.
You're like, great, okay, and then you're in a sequence. And you're like, okay, we're going to get to this empty play, which was great all week in practice. It looked good, and we get a little bit of a mental mistake by the tackle. Maybe Bates a little long, missed the throw, and you're like, God dang it! And we're in 3rd and 6, and we have another mental mistake. So you're like, cool. Like what about like what am I supposed to adjust as the play caller there when of the 4 plays I just called, there were mental mistakes on 3 of them. It's like everything was as we thought it would be. We just didn't execute the way we wanted to. And some of those aren't even like physical losses. They're just like detailing stuff up. So again, like, yes, you'd like him to make some of these adjustments earlier. You'd like him to find ways to get people the ball early. But when the game flow is like that, and when there's so much stuff happening around the offense, you're kind of like, I'm sure they came in at halftime and said, like, we are stopping ourselves. We have everything we want. And then they made some adjustments, got to more of the sprint stuff, and they got Terry the football. So,
yeah, which is very important. This from Keim's Twitter page. Since 2020, these are Washington's records when Terry McLaurin has the statistical output that I'm about to read to you. When he has one or fewer catches in the first half, Washington is 3-11 since 2020. When he has 4+ catches in the first half, they're 7-1. When he has 2 or fewer targets in the first half, 2-10. 5+ targets, 8-9-1. Has 2 or 3 catches, 15-12. Has 3 to 4 targets, 15-11. So it seems like, if you force feed him, like, it can get a little over the top. There is a bit of a curve. But if he has 2 to 3 catches on 3 to 4 targets, like, that seems to be optimal Terry usage in the first half. I would still take my chances on all these 5+ targets, 4+ catches numbers where they're around 500. But it's pretty clear, like, when you don't get him involved at all, 1 or fewer catches, 3-11, 2 or fewer targets, 2-10. Like, you've got to find a way to get him the football because and again, I know you can, it's almost like the running the football stats on some level where it's like, oh, if you run the ball 25+ times, it's like, well, yeah, teams that do that are up in the game. So they tend to rush the ball more late. But these are first half stats, and it's pretty clear that, like, when you get him the ball, good things happen because he makes good things happen and he will help you win the football game. So I would force feed him touches.
I kind of wonder if that's, like, spuriously correlated to, like, offensive efficiency. Like, if you're on the field more, he gets more touches, like, he gets more opportunities. So, like, that's really more of an indicator of just, like, good offensive production as opposed to him making plays. The thing I would say that, like, good offensive production comes from getting Terry McLaurin the football. Like,
it's a chicken and egg thing, and I would say Terry's the one that comes first.
So, yeah, I don't know if I agree with that necessarily. I think, again, this is something that, like, this is where my, like, analytics brain goes. I'm like, I would need to see more information. That stat in isolation doesn't do it for me. Like, if Terry gets an explosive play in the first half, like, are we more likely to win? Probably. But if anybody's gets an explosive play in the first, it's just so. Yes, should Terry get the ball more? He's your best player, absolutely. I think those statistics are somewhat misleading because I do think it is spuriously correlated. Like, if you're possessing the football, converting on third down, he's going to get more opportunities to touch the football, right? In this game, they were terrible on third down. Terrible on third. One for 15, right?
Yeah.
You're not sustaining drives. You're not executing at a high level. Like, it's hard to distribute the football in a way that's appropriate, right? So that's kind of what I would say to that statistic. And again, I'm with you. Terry needs the ball. Get the ball more. But I'm not saying just because we get Terry the football, we're going to win games. I'm saying it's good offensive production that is supplemented by getting Terry the football and distributing the football well. Like, I look at games this year that we've won, and Terry hasn't been like a feature in terms of targets necessarily. It's just been good distribution of the football. Sam's been playing good point guard. So that's what I would say to that. And again, like, I don't know if people are going to be mad about that, but that's just my perspective. And I need more information to make an informed decision on that. Because one stat like that, I'm kind of like, cool. Like, it's like the rushing statistic for me. It's like, run the ball more than
I get what you're saying. I just think that if you want to be more efficient, like, prioritizing getting him the football. Because, like, this is a guy that can create a first down out of a 4-yard hitch.
I'll say this too. I've been a part of offenses like when I was in Chicago, and Alshon Jeffrey was absent from the offense, and he was like our stud at the time. This was like, 2016. He was like, he's coming off like a 1,500-yard season, like, baller, right? Beast, great 50-50 guy. When he came, like, that offense was clicking without him in the offense, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we need to make sure he gets his 10 to 15 touches a game, and the offense just stymied completely because so much of the focus was, instead of being on good offensive production and distributing the football and taking advantage of what the defense was giving you, was designed to force him the football. And I do think that it can go the other way. The same thing would happen with Julio. When we'd prioritize and Julio's a beast. D-Hop's a beast. But when you prioritize it too much, it stunts the offense. And I just want to me, that's what I'm kind of pointing out here is, yes, you want him involved, but you want him involved in the context of a productive offense, of a diverse, well-distributed offense. And I think that's what I would push back on. It's not, if they target the ball to Terry 10 times in the first half, it doesn't mean they're going to win the football game.
100%.
It's got to,
the numbers reflect that,
it's got to be in an ecosystem of everybody getting involved and everybody touching the football.
Yeah. I mean, the when they're over 500 is when he's got 2 or 3 catches in the first half on 3 to 4 targets. The numbers come back down a little bit if he's got 4+ catches or 5+ targets, which obviously kind of go together. But I think it's like, hey, if we're going to call that wide receiver screen, we're going to call like some of these game plan touches, let's call them to Terry.
Yeah.
Find a way to get him the ball because he's the best guy with the ball.
Which has not been a big feature of the offense. It's been more like we've talked about. It's been more like we're calling the offense. And I think they've moved Terry around the formation a little bit more and tried to find him stuff that they can do. But to me, like Terry's like a true X. Like he lacks some of the skill set that some of these other like Justin Jefferson or Tyreek Hill has, where like they can kind of literally put him at the slot. They can put him outside. I don't think Terry has that same exact skill set. So it might be, I would assume it's a little bit more challenging to kind of find some of those opportunities for him. I'm not saying they can't, but I'm saying like that's something that kind of, when I'm watching the film, sticks out to me. But I agree. Terry needs the ball more. I'm with that. I just want to make it clear that it's like, it's not a one-to-one.
Don't take it to an extreme.
Correct.
Last thing I want to talk about real quick for the offense, because we've gone obviously predictably long on the offense because there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
The run game was not particularly great. It actually wasn't terrible.
Right.
But they just didn't have a lot of attempts because that's what happens in a game where you don't ever convert on third down. But Chris Rodriguez was definitely their best runner.
Sure.
I think there's questions about the blocking. It doesn't seem like they get a whole lot of movement. They're also playing a pretty good D line in terms of the interior. But the Giants were giving up 5-1 a carry going into this game. And I know that that's influenced heavily by the fact that they played Seattle, Miami, and San Francisco. But like what happened in the run game and can that / should that be a bigger part of their offense moving forward?
And I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and this, like I come from a very specific offensive perspective when it comes to this stuff. When I watch well-organized, cultivated, diverse run games, like that's what I want to see. That's not how everybody runs their offensive game plan, just to be clear. So when I look at this, like they're running base runs. They're running Wanda. They're running duo. They're running whatever, outside zone from the gun. Like that's what they're running. There's not like they ran a little bit of counter. They ran a little bit of GT, the GT that got blown up in the backfield. Like, let's talk about that for a second. GT's a great play, but if that backside linebacker pressures, like there's nobody there for him and you're going to have a tackle for loss. So that's one of the negatives of running that play. So, but when you watch, again, Kyle, when you watch Miami, when you watch Green Bay, any of these teams like Cleveland, for example, you can tell they work hard to make sure that when they call a run, that guys have good angles and lines to the second level of the double team. And I do think the offensive line does a pretty good job creating movement. The problem is like when we're double teaming to an out leverage player, the double team's just going to be kind of mushy, right? It's just going to mush. And you're asking the next double team to win demonstratively, but that's going to mush, right? Because of how they've aligned their front. So can I formation? Can I use receivers? Can I find ways to create angles to the second level player that are advantageous to me as a running back or a run game coordinator? And I think that's something that they don't do because of how the offense is cultivated, right? It's cultivated around as running the football as a secondary concern to throwing the football and we've talked about why that from an analytics perspective, there's an advantage there. But to me, that's like what you're going to run into when you've got a group of guys like this on the offensive line, like, and you're asking them to run kind of normal runs, like without any kind of seasoning on them. Like this is going to be the result 9 times out of 10. Like you got to work ways to find angles and positions to the second level players. And that's not always getting done. And that's okay because that's not the priority of the offense. The priority of the offense is to throw the football. And then once you've thrown the football effectively, it opens up the run game. And then those angles become more efficient. If you have to hang your hat on it, that's going to be very, very challenging. I think, if you don't live and die by it, like Mike Shanahan used to say, if you want to run the football, you have to live and die by it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
They are not doing that right now. The last 3 games, they are a league high. They're second overall this year in terms of skew, pass run. Minnesota is the only team that passes it more. Last 3, they are the league leader in that. They are passing the ball 73% of the time.
It's a lot.
That just seems like, and this goes to like a larger question about how this organization has approached everything. They try, like, it just seems like the approach in the offseason and the approach in the regular season are two very different approaches. Like, you come out of last offseason being like, we want to run the football more. You've built a team that theoretically wants to do that with their personnel. And then you go hire an offensive coordinator who we both like a lot in terms of what he's done, and think it was a good hire. And it was obviously very exciting at the time. People have started to sour on that because that's what happens when you're under 500. But you bring in the guy that's literally the past happiest guy in the league, and you make a decision at the quarterback position, which I think a lot of people are excited about. Sam Howell, 5th-round quarterback, but he's got this one big thing that really held him back in college, which is he takes a lot of sacks, takes a lot of pressures. You don't want to put too much on him because he's young. He's a 5th-round pick. Even as a 1st-round pick, he's inexperienced. And then you go pass the ball 73% of the time. And it speaks to a larger, like, global level. I don't want to say mistake, but like it leads you to just like zooming all the way out and asking these like global level pictures about what they're trying to do offensively and whether they have the right pieces in place. And I think that you see in a game like this why those are really valid questions with fairly unsatisfactory answers, because you've got this team in the Giants that's ripe for the picking. They're 1-5. They haven't scored an offensive touchdown in 3 games. They're super pressure happy. And if you just run the football more, then maybe you don't expose some of the mistakes that happen, and you don't have a quarterback that winds up by the 3rd quarter looking shell shocked. And you don't have to have him identifying all these blitzers, but you made this bed in the spring with decision makings about personnel and how you want to run your offense and the things that you practice, and you just continue to do your thing. And it's not really, unfortunately, I think, surprising that it didn't work on Sunday, even if it was maybe a little surprising to the extreme that it didn't work. Just that kind of this global level, much bigger picture, much bigger than this game when you look at like that statistic.
Yeah, and I think when you're like, I think New York's a really good case study for this, right? Like they're not an uber talented football team, and they don't do a ton of diverse stuff in the run game. It's more than what Washington does, obviously, but they were perfectly content with being like, we're going to put this game into 4-wheel drive. We're going to be very selective about when we find and take our shots. And I think in a game like this, I think that's kind of what we were expecting them to do. Obviously you're not playing the Kansas City Chiefs. You don't need to put up 40. So like, can you manage the game flow in a way that allows you to be in it and competitive? And to a large extent, the defense did a good job of keeping the offense in the game and special teams as well. But I just, and it's so easy, I think, for fans to be like, oh, you got to run the football more. Like it wasn't, I don't know, what was the yards per carry? Do you have that there, Craig?
I think it's 4.0. Yeah, they had 76 yards on 19 attempts, 4.0 per carry.
Yeah, 4.0 per carry, and there's a scramble in there and stuff. And
Sam had an 11-yard scramble. So running backs, Rodriguez averaged 4.4, Robinson averaged 2.9, Gibson averaged 3.5.
Yeah, so not terrible, but in games like this, sometimes you got to lean into that a little bit more. And then there was a ton of penalties, which again make it really hard to run the football. And 2nd and 10 is a tough down and distance to be in for this offense right now. So, and I think EB was pretty good about mixing it up in terms of running on 2nd and 10. But when it's not who you are, it's hard to get to it, Yeah. And I actually think the offensive line does a good job run blocking. I think they're pretty physical. I think they get after it. They got good hat placement. They're athletic enough to get to the 2nd level. Like there's a lot of things to like about what they do from a run blocking standpoint. It's just, and they've busted big runs because they can get guys to the 2nd level. They can move around a little bit. And also, to be fair, I think the running backs at times, B-Rob and Gibson specifically, don't always set the front up. Gun runs, the timing and the positioning of that back is a little bit different than like from the dot. And I think you're seeing a little bit of kind of, you could see a better efficiency from the running back in terms of maximizing what they're doing in the running game. So I don't know, lots of stuff like that. And it's hard to kind of say this is who we are offensively and then shift to something else.
Right.
So as much as I want to say like they should run the ball more, like I just don't think they will. I don't think they're built that way. And we'll see as the season goes on. Maybe they find something.
That's where like I think it's interesting, right? Is from a personnel standpoint, on some level, it is how they're built. Like they drafted these certain offensive linemen and whatever over the last couple of years with the idea that that's who they were going to be, and then they totally shifted.
Yeah.
And so like they had a plan with Scott Turner here, and then they bring in EB, and it's like, I mean, last year I think they ran the ball more than anybody else in the league. They were almost 50-50 on the year.
Well,
And this year they're so violently the other way. And again, like to your point at the start here, right? If they just execute some pretty simple stuff, like forget even executing it like 100% of the mental mistakes. If they cut those in half, this is a wildly different game, right? So it's within this context, but then you like zoom out even farther and you're like, okay, well, moving forward, how do they deal it? Well, one, they don't have to deal with the Giants except for one more time this year. And like what Wink Martindale presents is different than everybody else. So that's helpful. But also, is there a way to make life a little easier for this O-line, make life a little easier for Sam? And like, what are the things, this would be like the last question I have on the offense. Then we'll quickly dive into the defense and then get out of here. But like, what are the things that are going to make Sam comfortable so that they can execute at a high level? And that, I would say, going into this game, I would have thought it was the quick game. Like, to EB's credit, you watch some of the other games where Sam's been good. If they can get a couple of quick completions and get him going, then he starts hitting stuff down the field, and like it can be pretty magical. He just missed that stuff early in this game. And if you're EB, you're like, son of a gun. Like, that was the easy stuff. Now what am I supposed to do? But is it getting him on the move a little bit more earlier in games? Is it letting him run the football a little bit more in games? Like, so, you talk about, for you, it was like, let me get that one good block in, and then I feel like I'm in the game. For him, is it running a read option and keeping it and, getting out on the edge and feeling alive? Like, whatever it is, EB's got to find, with Sam and with Tavita, like, it's not all on Eric, it's not all on Sam, it's on everybody to find the thing that is going to put Sam in a good spot and mentally and physically able to perform and find ways to get to that early in games. And I don't think that they found that yet.
Well, you mentioned comfort for Sam. I think there's games where you watch him, you're like, man, he looks great. Like, the Philly game looked awesome, and I think the first half of the Atlanta game looked great. And it's them running this offense. And I think one of the issues you used to see it with the old Indianapolis Colts when Peyton Manning was there. When you're so reliant on the quarterback position, if he's having even a slightly off day, like, you're going to struggle a little bit offensively. And I think that's kind of what you saw. Like, it wasn't a terrible performance by him, but like, he missed throws that he normally makes, and it hurt the offense. And like, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's like you with those incompletions, you become way less efficient offensively. And then I think the problem is you had nothing else to go to. Because when you're throwing the ball 70% of the time, that guy's got to make 70% of the decisions. And that was what you see with like New England or with Indianapolis. Like, Tom Brady would have a bad game, and Bill Belichick and that offensive staff would be like, hey, man, we're going to run the ball. And they could run the ball, and they were good at running the ball. And it was part of that team's identity. And then Indianapolis would have a bad day, or Peyton would have a bad day. And then Indianapolis was screwed because they couldn't do anything else, right? And so I think that's kind of what I'd point to here is good teams are more balanced, because even with good quarterbacks, that position is so leveraged. Like, they're going to have an off day, and you're going to need to like support them in a different way. And I feel like, to your point, this was an example where, like, even when Sam is good and he looks awesome, he's throwing the football well, there's going to be days like this, and you need something else to turn to kind of to settle him in. And I think for a lot of quarterbacks, it's the running game. So
that's well said. All right. That's the offense. Solid 50 minutes of it. If you're not full on offense yet, well, I'm sure
tough.
There's
check out Kimes podcast.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but I do. Go listen to Cakes. We're done with it. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Logan Paulson there. Craig Hoffman here. Let's talk about the defense, Logan. End with a little dessert, if you will, because the defense actually played pretty darn well in this game against an offense that is not very good, and against an offensive line that really struggled to block this defensive front. I think the Giants, like we were just talking about, the Giants did a good job of making that not matter as much in the game. But like that's kind of the weird twist of it, is like, they played well. The Giants had a game plan that made it not matter as much, but still, like, the defense played well enough to win this game for sure.
Yeah, I think they had like 60. So I think I told you this off air, or maybe the beginning of the show. We've been talking for a long time, and
we sure have.
And one of the things that stuck out to me is like, I have to pull positive plays. And so usually, like, for the offense, you pull, I think it was like maybe 9 or 10, not a lot, right? And defense, it was like almost 40 plays, and you're like, wow, like this coverage is excellent. Like, look at the guy's eyes here. Look at the rush here. Look at the effort here. Look at Ridgeway throw the center to the ground and get it on this tackle. Like, wow, there's so much good stuff here. And they really did a good job. And I know there was like outside of probably one drive and like 2 explosives, like there was not a lot cooking for them. And then for them, I also think like one of the things I love about the defense is in that red zone series, when the game's closing out, for Deron Payne to get that ball out, like talk about making a play for your guy, making a play for the team. And like they were doing that pretty consistently throughout the game, and credit to them. Really a great job. I thought the back end played much, much better. St. Juste was like, that's probably the best I've seen him play. And I know he gave up an explosive play to Hyatt, but like his technique, his reactions, his competitiveness at the catch point, his physicality on like screens and run game stuff was next level. Kendall Fuller did a great job being where he's supposed to be. Percy, I thought, did some nice stuff in terms of back end. We talked about that cover 2 mistake he had against Chicago. There was a quarters look where he's deep and he almost gets the interception. The front, specifically the defensive line, I thought did really well. This might have been John Ridgway's best game of his career. Played a little bit more, played about 20, would you say 26 snaps?
24, I think.
24. And then Allen, I thought, looked way more explosive, penetrating the backfield. Payne had a couple great plays. Chase with the sacks, obviously in the run game, up and down.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second for sure.
And then Montez, I thought, did well. And then, like it was just going down the list. You're like, this is definitely good enough to win. This is definitely good enough to win. I thought, and again, they look like they found something with the cover 2 structures they're running. Guys seem to be in much more comfortable, seem to be in better position. And then they do mix in that single high stuff, but they've kind of gotten away from the true man, gotten away from the true match. They did a lot. I'm not saying that's not part of what they do, but you can see I think Jack's found something that everyone's comfortable with. And it was much more fun to watch the defense side of the ball. Let's just say that.
Yeah, they also mix it up a little bit. There's one play in particular, I could even see it on TV, the way St. Juste rotated. I was like, oh, there's an invert. I think it was on a 3rd down. And you're like, oh, cool. Like they're mixing it up. They're making it hard for even Tyrod, as a veteran who's seen everything, to take that extra second, figure out what the coverage is. And that can allow the pressure to get home sometimes, that extra half second, that extra tick of a slight twist on basic coverage. That's good stuff. And I think the frustrating thing is like, what took so long? But this is what Del Rio, for better or for worse, this is what Del Rio's been on basically the exact same timeline 4 years running. The first 5 games, from there, like borderline top 5 unit. And they played really well. I think that the places they get exposed, and like this is relative because they gave up 14 points, and really it was just like they were thoroughly dominant outside those drives, except for the drive where Payne ultimately makes the play. And then I guess the missed field goal, like they give up a little bit, but even if that field goal goes in, like 17 should be good enough to win. If your defense gives up 17 a game, you're a top 5, top 10 unit in the league. Easy. So
and it wasn't
the
perfect,
linebacker.
but it was good.
The linebacker play. Barton goes out. Mayo comes in, and all of a sudden he's got to cover, and that's just not his forte. They've got to figure out ways around that if he's going to have to play, because you can't not like. It is funny watching Twitter freak out, being like, "Why is David Mayo covering anyone?" It's like, because he's a linebacker, and that's part of the job description. You have to find ways to get that guy to be in a position to be successful, and they seem to figure it out a little bit more as the game went. And then Jamin had 2 big, I would say one big miss on the touchdown to Waller. I don't think he played that particularly well. And then he got Saquoned. Like the thing is, on the touchdown to Waller, this is how I saw it. I'm curious if I'm correct here. So I'm going to take a risk and put my football knowledge out there. His job, it looks like it's 2. Like he's dropping with that.
It's Tampa 2. Yep.
He's dropping as the Tampa player in the middle of the field. He's trying to make sure that Darren Waller doesn't cut back across his face. The problem is he's not close enough to Darren Waller's face himself. Like he just leaves too much space. So like it's good leverage. He keeps Waller kind of in a box, but it's too big of a box. And Tyrod's able to squeeze a throw in there. And if you just play that a little bit closer, like you've correctly identified the threat, you've correctly been on the right side of it in terms of leverage. You just need to make sure that you're in position to make a play. And so it comes down to like when Ron talks about technique, like play the technique a little bit better and you're fine there. That's the way I saw it.
And that's a tough matchup, like
Yeah, of
that. I
course.
mean, like in Tampa too, like that's what you're looking for, getting your stud. Like we used to when I was in Atlanta, they'd run that with Julio, and you press the mic, he gets a little wide, and then you throw a back shoulder ball, and like if you've got good chemistry between the two, Matt Ryan and Julio, or Tyrod and Darren Waller. Darren Waller, like I met him down at Titan University. He's like legit 6'6", like 4% body. He's a absolute
He's a
mutant.
monster.
So like that's a tough matchup. And the other thing is I wonder, because Jamin doesn't normally do that, if that was a thing that he had to do because Cody was out.
Right.
So like that's something he hasn't got a ton of reps at least in game that I've seen, because he's always the hook player, right? He's kind of the guy, the will linebacker kind of dropping into space.
But they're like, we can't have Mayo run with Waller, so let's have Jamin do it. And so, that, again, like it's both wrong, but understand. Like you understand, like he hasn't had that many reps. He's doing it against Waller, but like that's probably the coaching point. Is like, hey man, you got to squeeze out a little bit more. Like it's cool that you're running with him, but like don't give him a throw.
And I think that's the thing is like when traditionally what you're trying to do there, like offensively, is what you'll see is guys try to beat you over the top, and teams have gotten away from that beat you over the top mentality to kind of like look like we're trying to beat you to then feather into that spot between the safety, the Tampa player and the hook player. And that's exactly what they did. And I've said this before, but this is stuff that gets tossed around in offensive meetings. There's no defense for a perfect throw, and perfect throw, perfect catch. And I think you get a little bit of that there. Obviously you want to be a little tighter, but like that's a tough matchup. It's a tough matchup. Like if I'm an offensive play caller, I'm like, yeah, let's throw that.
Right.
That's what I want.
And the same on the second touchdown. Like they get Jamin one-on-one with Saquon, and like as a defensive coordinator, as a defensive coach, you're like, hey bro, you got to make that tackle.
Yeah.
Like you have to. But if I'm Jamin, I'm like, he's Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
That's hard to make that tackle.
Yeah.
So there's only so mad I get at Jamin, but like ultimately that's how the Giants score their points, is they take 100%. Advantage of Jamin in coverage in some spots that put him in bad, highly leveraged situations. And the Giants did a good job there.
And we talked about it. Like last year, one of the things that I think was maybe the biggest difference between the Giants last year and this year is they found ways to get Saquon the ball in space like that, because I don't think he's a good runner. He's not a great runner in terms of vision. He's exceptional as a playmaker, right? If you categorize him as a playmaker, like he deserves a big contract because that's what he can do. Get him the ball in the flat. I don't think Jamin's even really in bad phase, but like it's just a big, strong, fast, athletic dude in a tough angle on a tackle, and you're like, dang. And then that's what you do as an offensive, as if you're trying to develop an offensive identity. Then you go get Darren Waller and like mismatch weapons across the board with linebackers, and I think that's what they had there, and they were able to exploit them in a way that Daniel Jones was not able to exploit them. And I will say this, like credit to Tyrod Taylor, that offense is drastically different with him at the helm, drastically different, much more aggressive, pushing the football down the field. And you see the result, like taking a couple shots to Hyatt, taking a couple shots to Waller. Like I don't know if Daniel Jones makes that throw on the I think he's physically capable of making it. I just don't know if he makes the decision to make it for the touchdown in that Tampa team. So you get just a guy who's a little bit more aggressive, guy that's played a ton of football, guy that was a good starter when he was in Buffalo for a couple of years. So maybe we slept on how on the tick he would give that offense. But yeah, like outside of those plays, outside of the one to Hyatt that St. Juice gave up, like it's a good.
Did he have two that he gave up? Yeah, the one in the first half and then the one like right before Payne.
Yeah, I don't remember actually.
The second one's the one that gets challenged, and Ron loses the challenge. So I think those are both on St. Juice, but he's in pretty good position both times. So, like those are great throws and great catches.
And so I'd say he had the PBU on the touchdown, which was like a 3rd and 6 going in. Great PBU there, and then I think he had like 5 or 6 pass breakups like that I had charted on my sheet. Like he was awesome, just triggering into the football, and like you said, competitive at the catch point with Hyatt. Liking to make a play on some of those. I mean,
he was targeted 12 times in the game.
He did a good job, man. Like when you watch it, like, and I know like it might not feel that way, but he just was in his bag. Like they'd run a little sit and he is breaking on it. Like that should be a completion like 10 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times. And he's getting a hand on it. Not even a pass interference, hand on it, ball down. Like he just did a great job. And so I know like he gave up 2 big plays, but I just thought his down to down play, I think his PFF grade's like an 82, right? It's like a blue, if I remember correctly. It's like it's a good grade.
81.7.
Yeah, 81.7.
88.6 in coverage, which is crazy when you give up 2 big explosives. I mean, the second one he gives up is not great. It's a double move. He gets hit on it. He's off balance. But like, you get targeted 12 times, like you're going to give something up.
that speaks to the point though that like his other stuff was really good in
Yeah.
coverage. Like it was like I've since I've been covering the team, I've not seen a DB do that. Like, and so maybe that's why I'm so surprised by it. Just his down in and down out consistency was awesome. Again, outside of those two big plays, so good for
Yeah.
him.
Last thing real quick, Chase.
Yeah,
He is relentless as a pass rusher, and PFF is rewarding him with very good grades. He is rewarding the team with sacks. But if you start to watch him a little bit more, and I will give credit to, I wish I could give credit to the actual commenter. That would have been smart, Craig. Go look up the guy's name. But commenter was like, "Hey, watch Chase a little closer." And there are some plays where, like, basically Chase sees it's a handoff. He's like, "I am good here.
yeah,
I'm not going to pursue. Like, I'm just we've that's not my assignment." And there's even one play in the first half, and where I watched it, and I like, it seems like he's got a pursuit angle to the football, and like he could go chase down the run backside. That kind of play that he makes sometimes, and I
yeah.
think he's made in previous
He's
weeks. And
yeah,
Montez makes it all the time. Not all the time, but like with more regularity than many other ends in football, because those guys are so freakishly fast, and he just like doesn't pursue it. And I understand that there are times as a pass rusher when you want to save your juice for the big downs. Like I'm not going to be overly critical of a guy who's like, there is a 0.01 chance of me making a play here, so I'm just going to save my energy to destroy the tackle in the next play. I really honestly don't have a huge problem with that. But when it's like pass downs, let me try to get a sack. Run downs, I'm not that interested. That's going to show up on film, and I think that's going to be brought up this week. And I think it's extra interesting considering Chase after the game is like, I got to set a better example in practice, and whatever he was saying there. It's like, hey man, if you're gonna talk that talk, let's walk that walk too. And how about just consistency, practice, game, down in, down out. And if that means you don't play 98% of the snaps, like take a seat sometimes and then go be 100% productive on 100% of your snaps.
yeah. And I was as a player, surprise, I was an extremely high effort guy. Like that was
Yeah.
my thing. And I will say, there's a lot of guys that I played with who weren't like that, and they kind of pick and choose when they're going to go. And I think he's picked his time, and I can't fault him for that necessarily, because as a defensive lineman, like that's how you get paid. You get paid off of getting sacks.
Right.
So
If he winds up with a 14 sack season, no one's gonna be like, but it was run pursuit.
yeah, it was not great. And I think that's something that fans got to remember is like when you're playing defensive end, you're getting paid. And like his pressure rate right now is through the roof. He's got a bunch of sacks. Like and in that aspect of the game, he's impacting it relatively consistently. I would just say, like, I think he played, would you say 61% of the 61 snaps?
61 of 68.
Like if I'm him, man, I don't need to play that much. And that's not like, I just think about the best D lines I played against. Like they were like hockey rotations of guys coming in to give guys blows so that when you're out there, you're like a maniac. And I think it'd be interesting to talk to Chase about whether he's just trying to be on the field for more passing downs and getting more opportunity that way. But I agree, like effort can always improve. It should always be better. But some of the best pass rushers I played against in my career, like Osi Umenyiora, Justin Tuck, Paul when he was up in New York, they were kind of chilling on first and second down, and then third down they just became a bunch of monsters, right? Jared Allen was the same way. Von Miller's got a little bit of that to him. TJ Watt, same kind of thing. Like that, it's a thing that guys do in the league, and I know that's not fun for fans to hear, but they know how they make money and they're going to get paid, and I can't fault a guy for wanting to do that.
No, I totally get it. I just think that there's
Miles Garrett does it. Like it's like
Miles Garrett had 6 tackles and like was what he did this weekend was insane.
But what I'm saying, like there are like what my point is like every elite pass rusher that I went against is Julius Peppers. Yes.
Yeah.
Same thing. Like same thing. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, there is.
It doesn't make.
I think there are levels. Well, it's not even about making it right. I think that there are levels, and I think that there is a point where it is probably right, and then there's other points where you're like, yeah, if we could get a little bit more out of you, that would be helpful.
And I'm with that, and I agree.
And I think Chase is kind of crossing into that line where you're like, hey man, like we know what's up here, but like this is taking it to a bit of an extreme. And I think the production, speaks to that. Where like against Atlanta, he has 0 tackles. He's got 3 this weekend in against New York, and it's like you're a guy that probably could have a little bit more impact on the game with just a little bit more effort on like 5% more plays, and like don't make it so obvious on the other ones that you're not really in for it.
Right. And I'm with that. Yep.
Yeah. That's our show. It's a very long show. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Even if it was in a masochist kind of way, talking about the offense for as long as we did. Good gracious. Hopefully they're better this week. They played Philly well last time. Can they do it again? We'll preview it coming up later in the week. Thanks so much for listening. Subscribe. Hey, look, if you made it this far and you're not subscribed, like clearly you like it. You've listened to an hour of us talking. Just go ahead and hit the subscribe button, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.